There was a piece of patriotism for me doing service. Like, I think I'd rather serve my country than go do Peace Corps or be in the military. Like, I want to serve domestically. That was really true for me when I did this. I left doing service so much more, it might sound cheesy, but in love with this country, in love with the imperfection of this country, and committed to trying to solve some of those imperfections as a career.
In 1991, I was a college sophomore and a student journalist who took his job too seriously. That was the fall when Bill Clinton, an alumnus of our university, made repeated stops on our campus to roll out new ideas as part of his presidential campaign. I got the chance to interview him, and along with another student writer, decided that we were going to ask hardball questions, like we were members of the working media in the White House press corps, rather than lob softballs to a prominent alum. To be honest, I was put off by Clinton's smooth dismissal of our questions about the economy and personal scandals. Slick Willie indeed. And then I sat in the crowd for his speech in the most beautiful auditorium on campus, wonderfully air-conditioned, a break from a sweltering September day in D.C., and an uncomfortable interview that had made me sweat. It was that day that Clinton shared his idea for national service. He proposed that college grads could go to work as volunteers in service to their country, teaching, building trails, staffing food banks. And in exchange, volunteers could earn a small stipend and modest student loan forgiveness. I was dumbstruck by this patriotic innovation, aimed right at my generation. I put down my reporter's notebook and my cynicism. The following year, after Bill Clinton was inaugurated, I hustled to become one of the first interns at AmeriCorps. I wanted a chance to deliver on a very cool, very patriotic idea. And after playing a tiny, tiny role, I got to be at the White House in 1993 when America was announced. Nicole Trimble was there on the very same day and played a much bigger role in delivering national service across the country and on the West Coast. We somehow connected these dots when we met and became pals at a yoga retreat last year, and we laughed about all the times and places where we crossed paths but never met. We've been chatting ever since about ways to make our country and our region better while rebuilding healthy community. Sound like stuff we talk about on this podcast? Welcome to Pacific Time, where we explore West Coast challenges and opportunities, as well as the prospect for independence. I'm your host, Greg Ammerfell. My friend Nicole has lots of good ideas and an amazing track record. She got me wondering, what if every young person on the West Coast did a year of national service? Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. What if that service wasn't just about volunteering, but about training for meaningful careers, building a shared civic identity, and tackling our region's biggest challenges together? Nicole Trimble has spent her career at the intersection of service and workforce development, from AmeriCorps to the Gates Foundation to boardrooms trying to reimagine equity from the front lines. In a moment when federal programs are getting slashed, Nicole offers a West Coast way forward, rooted in purpose, opportunity, and connection. I started asking Nicole about the zigs and zags of her career because it's a window into what's possible when someone puts herself in service rather than for political or personal gain.
Right, my career started with national service, which at the time, there wasn't AmeriCorps, but I did something called the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, which you may and a lot of people might be aware of. And it was like a precursor in many ways. The Jesuit Volunteer Corps had been there for decades, and it's now an AmeriCorps program. But at the time when they were launching AmeriCorps, they were looking for people who had done full-time service, Peace Corps, Vista, Jesuit Volunteer Corps, to help implement the legislation. And so I went back to D.C., helped implement the legislation, spent the next almost 2 decades of my life involved in national service, either as a member like I was then, or leading a national AmeriCorps program, a Spirit Corps that I led out of D.C. I trained thousands and thousands of AmeriCorps members, Vistas, and nonprofits that were hosting them for almost a decade, and was on the Governor's Commission for National Service, which is now called Serve Washington, because most AmeriCorps money flows into the governor's offices, into states, and the states decide how to distribute them. And I chaired that board under both Governor Gregoire and Governor Inslee. And on that board, we decided what were the pressing needs in the state of Washington. And then we, as a commission, worked with nonprofits throughout the state to meet those pressing needs in the state of Washington, which is really a brilliant way that the legislation was designed. So it's not the money comes from DC. It's federal money, AmeriCorps money, but it really goes to the states. So the states, Republican and Democrat, they all take the money and they all have AmeriCorps members, can decide for themselves, like, what is it that service would help solve in our state and in our communities.
Very cool. So then connect the dots between that and the work you've been doing most recently on workforce development.
The idea of volunteerism has, been a thread throughout my career, and ended up working at the Gates Foundation for a while, giving for the Pacific Northwest, which also was really related to many of the same organizations that we'd granted AmeriCorps members to were in that same portfolio. And from there went to corporate world, where I did corporate responsibility. One of the places where I was able to move really quickly was setting up a corporate volunteerism program, and got to know a lot of the frontline workers doing that where I was working. And they were often the first to sign up, the first to want to volunteer, the first to want to be part of their community in a way outside of work. And by knowing them, I really got interested in this idea of workforce development, or especially around frontline workers. What is the economic development piece here? What is the economic mobility piece here? How do we look at frontline workers so that they're not expendable? And there's a direct line to AmeriCorps, because AmeriCorps members are the frontline workers in the civic sector, in the social sector. They don't like to say this necessarily out loud, but it is a job training program for the nonprofit sector. It is a job training program in many ways for parts of the environmental sector. I can't tell you how many people I interview for jobs, and that was their first job, was AmeriCorps. It was an AmeriCorps position. In the past couple of weeks, we have completely eliminated almost all of those positions, which doesn't just hurt the thousands and thousands of nonprofits where these folks are placed, but it's devastating to these people, young and old, who are serving. They're showing up every day. They're going to work for a stipend, which is not a wage. And they're doing it because they care about the communities. And they're doing it many times because this is their career trajectory. This is what they want.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you, what is the state of the state when it comes to national service right now?
Yeah, so the past few weeks have been pretty brutal. It started with DOJ entering the Corporation for National and Community Service, laying off or firing 3/4, or administrative leaving. It's all the same at this point, 3/4 of the staff. And at the same time, eliminating the NCCC program. And the NCCC program is the residential program. And it was very, very much designed after the Civilian Conservation Corps that was part of the New Deal, which my grandfather was part of. So this is part of my family history too. This idea of service to your country doesn't just have to be through the military. Service through your country can be domestic service, and it changes how you look at your country. And I saw that in my grandfather's stories, and it's true in my stories. My husband did AmeriCorps; it's true in his stories. It's true in my brother and all my friends who've done the Peace Corps, even though it's overseas. Serving your country looks like a lot of things. I don't necessarily think that the people at DOJ know the details of what they were doing, but they first eliminated the NCCC, which is the residential program. And those young people are living often on downsized bases or decommissioned bases, and they're going out on spikes for 8 weeks to, some of them are in North Carolina right now cleaning up after the floods. Some of them are in the Palisades right now cleaning up after the fires. Some of them are working to build fences along rivers in the Rocky Mountain area so that those rivers are protected from cattle, which pollute the rivers. Some of them are going to be working at camps in the summer, but now they're not. They all were removed overnight. And then about a week or so later, almost all of the state AmeriCorps contracts were immediately canceled, putting about 32,000 AmeriCorps members completely out of work, and meaning that they cannot serve at the nonprofits, in the food banks, in the after-school programs, in the senior centers, doing fire prevention in forests done. And what's particularly devastating about this for me is that these people, mostly young people, 18 to 24 is kind of the target age, but of all ages, chose to serve their country, are getting a stipend, being paid generally pretty low income, poverty level wages. And because it's service, like the military getting a stipend, they don't qualify, most of them, for unemployment. And so they are these people serving our country were completely wronged, I think, by our country in this moment by saying you're expendable, you're no longer needed, when they are needed more than ever.
Yeah, and I think it's important to underscore your point. This was governors, Republicans and Democrats, who were very happy to deploy these funds to address critical social and environmental and all kinds of other issues in their areas. So it seems devastating in a lot of ways, not to mention the fact that, as you say, like this seems like a really important way to sort of cultivate citizenship and pride in our country.
It is, and that may be what is threatening about it, but there was a piece of patriotism for me doing service. Like, I think I'd rather serve my country than go do Peace Corps or be in the military. Like, I want to serve domestically. That was really true for me when I did this. I left doing service so much more, it might sound cheesy, but in love with this country, in love with the imperfection of this country, and committed to trying to solve some of those imperfections as a career. You can't work up close and personal with poverty in this country. You can't work up close and personal with our national lands in this country. You can't work up close and personal with people in poverty and not see the imperfections and not fall in love, right? So this, for me and for so many of my colleagues, so many of my friends, so many of the people I've worked with through the years, seeded a very, very deep commitment to being an active citizen.
This strikes me, as do many of the DOGE cuts, as being sort of pound wise and penny foolish. Do you know the ROI on national service?
Yeah, so the ROI is about, for every dollar invested in national service, the return is 17. So many ROI studies have been done around this work, and they almost all prove that there is a positive ROI. In the early days of AmeriCorps, we were under, scrutiny. Like, does this program make sense? Is it just another expense? And both Democratic and Republican legislators called for evaluation, wanting to know, like, what is this investment worth? And so I think more than probably most government programs, AmeriCorps has been deeply evaluated, deeply scrutinized. We were doing logic models and figuring out ROI long before it was like common and popular in the nonprofit sector.
What explains that 17-to-1 return on investment?
There's a lot of numbers out there about the number of AmeriCorps members. So there are full-time serving AmeriCorps members like I was and like my husband was. There's also part-time folks who maybe are in college and they're working with Jumpstart, or they're working with a program that is 5-10 hours a week. And they're doing this as maybe like a co-op for early child education or something like that. There's also senior volunteers, RSVP and senior companions, which is really about connecting seniors with purpose. It could either be helping other seniors or working with children. And so all of that is combined in this multiplier. And that's what we've really realized in all of these kind of countless studies of ROI, is that volunteerism and national service is a multiplier. You can't volunteer effectively without a volunteer manager. I mean, I've run nonprofits. You can't just have volunteers come in. They won't come back if they don't have a good experience. And you got to think about, like, what's the best and highest use for them. So many AmeriCorps members aren't just doing the service themselves, especially Vistas. They are serving as volunteer managers. They might be the crew leader at Habitat for Humanity. So that when the Habitat for Humanity volunteers come in, they're getting their best and highest use out of them. And so that's what really gets to that ROI number, is that this is a multiplier. The volunteer is a multiplier. And this country doesn't work without volunteers. It just doesn't. It is one of the beautiful things about this country. If you travel around the world, there's a sense of community and people helping their community. But one of the things that makes the United States so special is that volunteerism is really woven into the fabric of our culture and our democracy.
Gosh, and it goes back to de Tocqueville talking about civic engagement, right?
And he recognized that as like a very special and unique part of the culture.
So it seems like in this sort of casual cutting of national service, gosh, we're unwinding a very important thread of American culture and the idea of what it is to be an American.
So AmeriCorps has been around 30 years. Like, we were there during the quick kickoff 30 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. Vista was part of the war on poverty. This was part of LBJ. The Kennedy had planted the seeds and LBJ helped it bloom. So, with Vista, we're talking another 20 or 30 years. And then before that, the Civilian Conservation Corps was part of the New Deal almost 100 years ago. So this isn't like new. This is so woven into the fabric of who we are.
And a very long-running thread that probably even predates any formal government program.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's the national service side of things you've thought about, Nicole. What about the workforce development side? What is the state of the state in workforce development right now?
It's a really huge question. And there's a thread, right? Because AmeriCorps members are the front line, like I was saying. And this is professional development for the future. And I have so many thoughts about what's happening with workforce at the moment. This idea of bringing manufacturing back. I don't know if you've seen the polls about Americans who think it's a good idea to bring manufacturing back. Both parties, it's like almost 80% think it's a good idea. But then when you ask people if they want to work in manufacturing, if they want to do this work, it's in the teens. Both parties, right? So this idea of like working in factories, like, let's be honest, most people don't want to work in factories. They don't want to work in mines. Like the service and knowledge economy is what pays well and is how we've grown our economy. It's where we're ahead of the rest of the world. And by cutting things like NIH funding, cutting things like Department of Labor funding, cutting, jobs are gone, right? And these are, and who goes first? The front line, the young people, and the very expensive people, the wisdom and the knowledge, right? And so we're in a moment where I'm like, who's being trained? I have a son who's a scientist who's going to Europe next year because his NIH funding was cut. So is Europe training our future scientists? And then who's going to work in these factories? Manufacturing isn't, maybe what we think of in the Henry Ford days. It's advanced manufacturing now. If you own any type of manufacturing plant, you are very focused on automation. And most of what's happening is taking place by robots. And actually, that's right. And that's good. The Industrial Revolution has moved to this knowledge economy, and people shouldn't be pushing a button all day. They should be fixing the robots, programming the robots, creating the robots. And China has done an absolutely fabulous job of training people and having apprenticeship programs in that middle tier, right? Those that are working in manufacturing, but working with advanced manufacturing and automation. This is not a place we have invested in this country. And with DEI, we can call DEI a lot of things, but it's an investment often in the front line. It's an investment in professional development in your future workforce. And your future workforce are people of color. We talk about the Pacific Coast. California is a front runner. LA County's been majority people of color for over a decade, right? If not longer. Like the West Coast is really ahead here, saying like people of color are the majority, and we have to be investing in creating more inclusive workplaces if we want to be competitive.
Got it. So what I'm hearing is the idea of trying to get toward a more rational federal budget might make sense.
Of course.
The idea of an economic policy that's pro-American job could make sense.
Of course.
And yet cutting programs around volunteerism on one hand and cutting programs around job training on the other.
And education.
Run directly counter to the otherwise somewhat laudable objectives of fiscal discipline and job creation.
Absolutely. And to close the Department of Education, which is providing right now not only loans for people to go to college and direction to K-12, we don't hear about. They also provide resources to community colleges, right? And talk about another thing that the West Coast should be more known for than it is its community colleges. California's community college system is just the crown jewel of the community college network across this country. And that's where the promise lies, right? That's where the American promise lies. It lies in our community colleges. It doesn't lie at Harvard. Yes, some people go there. It lies in our community college. That's where our first generation college goers go. That's where our, single moms who need a night class to, go from being an LPN to an RN go. And to start to tear apart our community college system is tearing apart our future economic mobility, our jobs, all the things that we say we're investing in.
Yeah, the attacks on the Ivy League make headlines, and some of us can probably say, oh, I sort of see it. Those are well-resourced schools that don't need a bunch of federal money. But yeah, if the same cuts are also hitting community colleges, which are meant to support upward mobility and job creation, oh boy, we're not heading toward a good outcome, are we?
We aren't. And community colleges are really kind of unsung heroes in our country. I'll say it again. They are the the promise of America, if it is still true and if it still lies anywhere, it's in our community colleges. That apprenticeship program I talked about, if it exists anywhere in the United States, it's existing in a community college. We get a new aviation plant here in the Pacific Northwest. Who do we turn to create that new manufacturing program specific to that new plant? The community college system. We have a shortage of healthcare workers here in the Pacific Northwest, actually along the whole West Coast. Who do we focus on to help with that job training? The community college system.
Interesting. I mean, what you're highlighting for me is that DEI, which is tainted in many ways as a title, is good for business. The reason Costco and Apple and other West Coast companies have said we're standing by this is because they need it in order to lay out the welcome mat to women, to people of color who are going to take their jobs, but then rise up, build their skills, and become leaders in their companies over time. There's no other strategy, really.
There's not, because who are your customers? Your I mean, if your workforce doesn't look like your customer, you're not going to build a product that your customer wants to buy. I mean, that's what it comes down to, is that by 2030, we're going to be, if not sooner, we're going to be a majority people of color in this country, which means, and who has the majority of purchasing power in this country? Women, right? So women make the household purchasing decisions. We know this. So if we're not building our businesses around those who are purchasing and those who are making purchasing decisions, because we're designing products and services for them, then we're not building a great business. And like, Costco knows who shops.
Well, and it further strikes me that laying out the welcome mat, it's a hard step because of historic inequities, but it's the easiest thing. The hard work is ahead in actually helping cultivate people over the course of their careers and their times working with the company. That's where the rubber hits the road.
The career. Mm-hmm. And they can't abdicate the responsibility anymore. It is their responsibility to cultivate the people both culturally and skill-wise.
So Nicole, what are some of the most exciting or underused levers for scaling civic or community-based engagement on one hand, but cultivating workforce on the other?
I'm not sure the levers are underused right now when it comes to civic engagement. I feel like we built an amazing infrastructure through corporate social impact. We've been having corporate volunteerism, both like doing pro bono work and like working at food banks, as well as doing service learning in schools, as well as building this opportunity for people to volunteer in a stipended way that can be a multiplier.
Let me pause you there just to say, it sounds to me like we don't need some WYSIWYG, new invention to scale up civic engagement. What we need is to protect and extend the investment in the programs that we have, and to do so in a way that actually supports people functioning in this work above the poverty line. Crazy.
Crazy, I know, super crazy. And back to Michael Smith and some of the fabulous work he did, he started FEMA Corps. He looked at like where are the big problems that more AmeriCorps members could be focused on. And so when I started this work, it was really focused on third grade reading, right? We poured AmeriCorps members into schools and tutoring students. Still a problem, but he's looked at like what are some other big problems that we could be putting professionals in, as well as people who are just starting their careers. And he started FEMA Corps because our number of natural disasters due to climate change is, it feels like it's on the weekly. And so FEMA Corps deployed when there's a natural disaster. Many of those people end up becoming EMTs. They end up becoming, this becomes their career, right, to do disaster response. And so investing in that's really important at this moment. The other really interesting project he started was a public health corps, seeing that we have public health needs that are growing, and there's a growing interest in young people in studying public health. And so what are the ways that we start training them right out of the gate in providing, well child visits and making sure, and I did some of this work when I was a Jesuit volunteer, and I think the need is pretty bottomless in our country at this point.
I remember a lot of talk back in the early 90s about the parallels between national service and the role that the military played with the GI Bill. Elaborate on that analogy, would you?
Yeah. So when you complete your service as a military member, you get a GI Bill. And the GI Bill's there to pay for college. The way national service is set up is that you get an education award when you're done. It's legislatively set at a fraction of the GI Bill, so it's not the same as the GI Bill. I think it's around $7,000 right now for a full term of service. maybe a little above, and it was a little above 4,000 when I did it 30 years ago. So it's really not kept up with the pace, the inflation of higher education. But then you can use that education award to pay for college, to pay for trade school, to pay off your student loans. You can also use it, they changed the legislation, so you can also use it to pay for your children's college or for your grandchildren's college as well.
Well, and it strikes me that, I mean, you're hinting at this, that, people who go into FEMA Corps, who go into the mental health corps, then end up populating those professions, the related professions. So in the same way that the military has created this sort of way for young people to rise up, gather real experience, working with teams in a structure, and then yes, bonus, you get some money to apply to formal education that helps you codify what you've just learned. It seems like national service is a sort of an under-recognized form of something very similar for a wider array of people.
Absolutely. I mean, and I'll just use myself and my husband as example. So in national service, I worked in legal services and thought, oh, I'm going to be a lawyer. Realized, ooh, I don't really like the law part. I love the policy part, and I see the connection to education. And went and got an education policy degree, which was about economic mobility and has been like the foundation of my career. My husband worked in an environmental program, and he now works for the Port of Seattle doing environmental work. That was his entree, was his on-the-ground learning for 2 years. The first year actually doing the hands-on environmental work, and then the second year leading a crew, right? And so it was leadership skills, and it's actually direct technical skills that we both got in AmeriCorps, and then said, hey, we want more education, we want more training in this, we found our passion. That is one of the beauties of this program, and I think you'll hear it again and again from folks who have done service. This helped me decide this is where I wanted to spend my career, or this is how I wanted to use my life for good.
I was just reading over the weekend that employment for young people, independent of what's happening with the federal government, is on a real decline. And even kids who are graduating with really prestigious degrees and credentials are having a hard time finding work. A, what's happening in the macroeconomy, and B, doesn't this point to this being even more important to find ways to launch young people into meaningful and civic oriented work?
So what's happening on a macro economy scale is that a lot of those entry-level positions you might hire a recent college graduate for are being AI'd. Simple writing positions, assistant positions, a lot is being done by technology now. And so those frontline jobs are the first. I think the rest of our jobs might become AI too, but the frontline jobs are the first. And those are the ones that often early career folks go into right out of college or right out of community college. The thing about most of the AmeriCorps positions and positions like it, there are the positions that are AI proof are those that are uniquely human. It's everything from being a social worker to cutting hair. These are not going to be AI'd. And the majority of those AmeriCorps positions do not have technical solutions. They are human solutions. And so places where there are still going to be jobs are those that require you to be uniquely human. And so if you have a young person looking for work, that is one of the pieces of advice I give my kids. 2 pieces. One, learn how to learn, because you're going to have to learn quickly your whole life. It almost doesn't matter what you're learning, learn how to learn. And the second one is think about what's uniquely human. What can you do that no machine's going to be able to do, and know how you're going to add value there.
Let's pivot, Nicole. This is a podcast about the West Coast and our future here. What is the West Coast getting uniquely right and wrong when it comes to service and workforce development?
So when it comes to national service, first of all, I'm so proud of being a Washingtonian when it comes to this. So Washington for many, many years has had more AmeriCorps members and service members per capita than any state in the country. Right now, Washington has about 5,000, little over 5,000 Service Corps members, or did before the cuts. California, 18,500. Now, Oregon's is about 10% of that, but our West Coast states have really led the way here, and our governors have led the way. So Gavin Newsom was the first to cry foul on the NCCC closures, because it was really impacting his state that all these young people who were working in the Palisades or working on fire and FEMA gone. There's a separate lawsuit from the states as well that Delaware's leading that Nick Brown and Governor Ferguson signed on to. And one of the things I'll say about Governor Ferguson, there's a lot to admire, but he was a Jesuit volunteer corps. He was in the Jesuit volunteer corps a few years before me. And so in his statement about AmeriCorps cuts, he spoke of that, like knowing firsthand how this is like really good for the community and really good for the people serving. And you know who else it's really good for? It's really good for the people that work with the people serving. Like there is nothing like a young idealistic person showing up ready to serve and really believing in the promise of tomorrow. And so one of the things I think that our West Coast has done so well has been a leader in national service and a leader in saying, no, like this is not okay.
Well, and we'll come back to talking about the West Coast in a minute, but I love that point that when things are going right, there is this coordination and collaboration, as you say, between the federal government, with the state government, with the private sector, with philanthropy. That is America working. And right now, it seems like a lot of those sort of key tenets are being chipped away at. Who knows what replaces them? And so we're entering a time of restructuring, and who knows what we're going to get on the other side.
Or we're in a time of burning it down, and how do we rebuild it better?
Yeah. So, this brings me to thinking about the West Coast and taking responsibility for what's close and what sort of just seems to align around a common set of values. And it's really fantastic to hear that the West Coast has been so engaged in volunteerism at every level, at the individual level on up to the governor level. Oh, and I also wanted to say, I think the story you told about Bob Ferguson being a member of the Jesuit Volunteer Corps is so common. So many people I hear about who are in leading universities, playing leading roles in hospitals, had some experience working in the Peace Corps, working in AmeriCorps, working in Teach for America, which is an AmeriCorps program.
Members of Congress. I mean, it's not in the shadows. And Gen X, we were the first one. So right as we move into leadership, we're seeing it. I'm so glad you're seeing it too.
Yeah. And look, we've known for a long time that the military was a great training ground for leadership in other sectors. National service is very much the same.
Yes, absolutely. And that's part of the training.
Yeah.
I mean, I was trained in facilitation. I was trained in conflict resolution. I was trained in setting meeting agenda, like things that I realized like young people will come into, I'm like, oh, they don't have, or even people in their 30s and 40s, they never learned that, right? They started work and nobody put them through a training every Friday.
Yeah. So let's assume for the moment that the federal government is going to walk away from this. And even if court cases are successful, the damage may have been done, that Congress may line up behind these executive orders and withdraw significant, if not total funding from national service programs. What can California, Oregon, and Washington do to set up its own form of service? And how could it be built up better?
Beautiful question. So before AmeriCorps, the state of Washington had service. And I think that's part of the reason the state of Washington was able to scale and be as effective as it was, because we had the Washington Service Corps and the Washington Conservation Corps pre-AmeriCorps. So the Washington Service Corps was running programs out of employment security, I believe also funded by Commerce, where there maybe looked a little bit more like job training programs, and individual placements, but it was state funded. And the same with the Conservation Corps. We had our own Conservation Corps funded through ecology, doing trail building and repairing habitat and things like that. This isn't a ridiculously expensive program, and we know the ROI is there. And I would bet with the right leadership, we could get some funding back into that. I mean, this is the same with the state of California, that it may not be the levels that we had when we had federal funding. We may have to rethink things like the education award, which were not there before. But there's a long-standing tradition of finding ways to have volunteer corps, youth corps, things like this before AmeriCorps. I served before AmeriCorps. Bob Ferguson served before AmeriCorps. And so what does it look like for the state to invest in its own form? And then you can design. I mean, there's some funky things about AmeriCorps, the way it's taxed, the way the education award taxed, the way... Start again. Start fresh. There's some things built into like the war on poverty legislation around VISTA that sometimes I think restrain some of the good work. You don't have to, you can start fresh and say what really works and how do we even more make it unique to our state.
So help elected officials and maybe corporate and philanthropic leaders on the West Coast think about applying the national service model to our region. What problems pop to mind, Nicole, that you think lend themselves to an influx of volunteers?
I think there's two ways to look at it. One is, what problems do we need to solve that the influx of volunteers, and the other is like, what's the future of work? Where do we need to be training people? And I would say when it comes to climate change and the repercussions of climate change and the green economy, we need to be training people. And there's a STEM component of this. And so what does it look like to train people for the green economy? Because if this administration believes in it or not, this is where we're moving, right? Like, it's cheaper to have renewable resources than to have extractive resources. Like, eventually, this is where we're going. And how do we train young people, many of which are deeply passionate for the green economy? So that's one place that I think is almost like a no-brainer. And then the other piece, like back to the being uniquely human, it's finding ways to address the loneliness epidemic. If it's with young people, if it's with old people, if it's through doing community organizing around neighborhood projects. And we know that this loneliness epidemic is creating all these deaths of despair and substance abuse problems and addictions. And we know what solves it is connection. And so what better than to have, people out there that it's their role to create connection. And through that connection, we are reducing all of these costs of, addiction and homelessness through just what being human desires from us, which is to be in community and to take care of each other. And I can't see anything better than AmeriCorps members working on these two big projects. Because this loneliness epidemic, the solve for it can show up in so many different ways. It can show up like in schools, and it can show up in senior centers, and it can show up in workforce centers. It can show up everywhere.
It strikes me that there's an opportunity to kill like 3 or 4 birds with one stone here.
Yeah.
Okay, so young people are having a hard time finding jobs. Let's create service opportunities at scale for a lot of young people. We're, facing challenges around climate remediation or disaster response. Here's the opportunity for us to deploy young people and their energy. And by the way, if we can bring them together in teams where they're going to meet other young people and they're going to get to do work together and they're going to emerge with lifelong acquaintances, if not romantic relationships, it's totally good. And it's good for the regional economy as well.
Bingo. You nailed it. I think the other piece to that group too is that they're working in teams. You said that about not all service members work in teams, but the majority of them do. And as an employer, I have seen the inability to work in teams to be one of the things that ruins people's careers. And so totally learnable and something that AmeriCorps is preparing us for and preparing young people for is how to work together better and work with people who are different. Right. So an NCCC team is going to have somebody with a graduate degree from an Ivy League school and somebody from who's just exited foster care on the same team. And that's democracy, right? That is the beauty of our country, is that we do this is what makes up the fabric of our country. But if we don't create opportunities for people to work together and know each other and see each other and hear each other's stories, we end up in our silo that's a me silo, and we're seeing this play out.
It's such a good point. And it dawns on me that if we think back through our 250-year history as a country at this point, every crisis has been met with incredible collaboration in the response. And those are the moments we look back on so fondly as being formative to the national identity, whether it's the American Revolution, whether it's either side of the Civil War, frankly, whether it's a response to World War II and the Great Depression, whether it's the Great Society and all the unrest in the 60s and Vietnam. Like, people came together to address issues, and the government played a big role in helping facilitate that.
That's the government's role. The government's role is to facilitate and support things that don't have a capitalistic bottom line, right? We're seeing that just pulled away one thing after the next. I don't think national service has like a capitalistic bottom line, but I think it has an incredible ROI when it comes to our health as people, as individuals and communities. And so for the government to play a role in strengthening the fabric, I wonder, are there nefarious reasons why you want to tear that apart? Because you want the fabric to be weaker? You don't want people who come from different walks of life to learn how to work together and to know each other and see each other? I mean, I can't think of anything better to create a strong country.
Yeah. And again, if the federal government's committed to withdrawing from that, it strikes me that West Coast governments, and frankly, any state government, needs to say it's not a question of whether we can afford this. It's a question of whether we cannot afford it. Totally. Well, hey, another fun part of this podcast, Nicole, is that we get to play the game of what if. So what if every high school graduate had a guaranteed year of paid service? What would change on the West Coast?
I think we'd have a much, much more engaged citizenry. I think people would care much more deeply, not just about their communities, but about their democracy, because they would see democracy in action and in inaction. I think more people would stay here. Not that people leave in droves, but I think people would feel more of a commitment just to using their skills and using their education to better their own state and their own community. And I think we're just going to have a stronger social fabric and a stronger civic fabric by having national service. I often wonder, do places like Switzerland and Israel require military service because they need people in the military? Or do they require it because they need people to be engaged in their democracy and thoughtful about their countries and more patriotic? And I think that's what a year of service can do.
Interesting. Related, what if national service became a requirement for receiving financial aid or student debt relief?
I think it would absolutely change us as a nation for the better.
And then let's look at the economic side of this. What if our transition to an AI-driven economy included service and workforce development?
You know, it's interesting. In my workforce development world, we talk a lot about guaranteed basic income. The reason is that a lot of jobs are going to go away and people do need a guaranteed basic income. But what we've learned is that when it comes to guaranteed basic income, both citizenry and those who would be recipients want to have purpose. And so it seems to work better to top up people's salary with guaranteed basic income if they're doing work like childcare or social services, which we've experimented with in King County. What would it look like if on the West Coast that part of guaranteed basic income is figuring out how you serve, right? And the beauty of national service and volunteerism in general is like there's a flavor for everyone. There's something everyone could find purpose in and find meaning in.
If we're serious about preparing the next generation for the West Coast we want, one that's just, resilient, and prosperous, then we can't leave it to chance. Nicole Trimble makes a powerful case for investing in people starting at the front lines. From community colleges to AmeriCorps, from DEI to green jobs, the tools are there. The question is, do we have the will to use them? So listen, follow, drop a review, and share this podcast with neighbors who dare to challenge the idea that service is an undertapped approach to training our future workforce and our future citizens. As always, I'd love to hear your take. Find us on Substack, Instagram, or wherever you share your thoughts. Thanks for being with me in Pacific Time, and let's keep asking the what-if questions about the future of the West Coast. See you next time.